Now, Michael, riding on the back of the last question, there's a lot of people who think that we are in the age of the Kali Yuga. This comes out of the Vedic teachings, and they say that this is a feminine age. So what are the implications of being in the age of the Kali Yuga on something modern like the rise of third wave feminism, for instance?
Yeah, well, oh my God, I'll be getting into that. I got into a lot of that in the Auto Rank premium presentation on the Psychology Auto Rank, and I'll be doing it again in the next couple of weeks when we look at horror movies, doing a podcast on it, and I'm dipping into it, again. And it all has to do with, partly to do with these female cults, but partly to do with age-old deceptions that women perpetrated on men. This is, not known to many millions of people, right? That feminism is a response, a belated latter-day response to the patriarchy. As they say, that I accept is quite true, right? But the thing is that the feminists who have risen and have so much socio-political control right now have no idea how patriarchy came about. And all of their accounts of how it came about are bogus. And, I've been talking about that in a lot of work, but we're going to go into it one more time in a different context in a couple of weeks, and I would love to have you on and we can talk about it then. The Kali age is Vedic, yes, but I have a lot of time for things like that. I do believe we're in the Dionysian age, so I have time for some of this Vedic stuff, but with this proviso, and that is that everything Vedic is a reiteration of pre-Vedic gnosis, which is, complexion-wise very different. Although it's still, you can find it in the Vedas, in the Puranas, and in the Upanishads, and these later codified Hindu, so-called Brahmin, systems. The only trouble is they're basically mutilated, right? So I got time for them because I can see in them, even the story of the Mahabharata and all of these things, right, is again the whole cosmic, there was no Arjuna and Krishna. This is all stuff that happened up there, right? And was reiterated by later sages in story form. And there's nothing wrong with that because we've just been talking about the right brain and symbolism, right? So the stories of King Arthur, the stories of, the Mahabharata, and even of the conflict between Set and Horus, it's all based in sort of cometary action, celestial. Not all. There are other threads to all of this, but by and large, when those celestial events happened, they kind of helped to animate other, even more primordial legends. Some of them very, very ancient, but they were co-opted, you see. So a lot of symbols came together because there was a time for that. It became a time when the codification of these books from these celestial events was such an impactful thing that was happening in the world that there was a lot of drawing on even older gnosis. So what you're left with is a tremendous iconography, the Egyptian being the most outstanding. But the Chinese tried it, with their dragons and all the rest of it. So every culture in this way or that way, even the Siberians did, the Scythians certainly did, right? The pre-Celts did. So all Vedic stuff is a kind of a much poorer rendition. So their concepts of cyclic time, for instance, right, I think need to be rejected. This is one of the mutilated aspects. Their whole concept, that time goes in these fixed cycles, and that what happened in the past will happen again. Although there's certain philosophical truths to that, ultimately speaking, I don't subscribe to fixed patterns of time. It would be to negate any kind of Hegelian, unfolding of the universe, even in the Whiteheadian way, right? All of our modern understandings, I think, are more solid. And what the German idealists came up with, which is there is an unfolding. We don't know quite too much about it, but there's a process and an unfolding and a progress. And it doesn't mean that there's going to be dissolution and we're all going to fall back, again to no, they didn't look at it like that. The Vedic system is rather unsophisticated, right? So I take on slightly, a different approach than that, but again, that would take a long time to extrapolate. And I don't even believe really that, and it's proven because in nature, which was meant to be the most fixed thing of all, right? was meant to be the fixed cycles of nature, called the laws of necessity. And that's where these Brahmins and post-Vedic people might have even got their idea of fixed time, is from watching nature and mistakenly thinking that nature's cycles are fixed. We now know through what's known as emergence theory that that's not the case. So, oops, a great deal of Vedic concepts of time then can be thrown out, because the one background, right, the backdrop on which they may have been establishing their theory, unfortunately, that's null and void. So, what do you do now? Right? So while everyone was sleeping and didn't know the paradigm had changed, yeah, the progressive stuff is a little bit more, substantiated. Although, again, don't buy into that either, because that asks a lot of questions about the nature of spirit. Spirit is so perfect. Why would it need to unfold? Doesn't that imply a limitation in spirit? And if there's a limitation in spirit, where am I now? Well, you're into, German mysticism and German idealism. What do I do with that? Well, my God, here's another elephant in the room. You see, so all sorts of new paradigms come in that blow our materialistic paradigms to pieces, and start asking deep, deep questions that the priestarchies of the world don't want you to talk about. But then you have to tell them, well, then, even in your own iconography, God is both a male and a female. There's the goddess. Explain that. Isn't that a dualism? And if there's one dualism, maybe there's even a more primordial dualism. Well, they go, out of the class. Hey, shut up. You're getting an F. Well, I just asked a question. Yeah, well, you're not allowed to ask a question. Yeah, but you seem to have this warlike Jesus in the New Testament and this very compassionate Jesus. Can you make sense of that? The dualism is everywhere. The one who says to his mother, get thee behind me. I accept no mother. My Father is in heaven. Wait a minute. Is that the compassionate Jesus? Why would he be talking to the Virgin Mary like that? I'm very confused. Isn't she the one who birthed him? Why is he now saying, get thee behind me? What crime has she committed? What's going on? Well, there you are, right? And if he's the Son of God, how come some of the disciples are doubting him? Come on, right? Why do 3 women go to the tomb to awaken him? 3 women? Haven't we seen that in other mythologies like the Greek and the Egyptian? You see, so this is what we're dealing with here requires incredible doubt, incredible skepticism. And so, yeah, the Vedic system has its merits, but I think they also accrued over time with some Gnostic concepts, right? And so on. Golden age, yeah, I do believe there's a golden age, but somehow the rendition of it, right? It got misunderstood. But when it comes to prehistory, when you realize what wreckage we're talking about, we're not only talking about wreckage in the terms of documents going missing and the deliberate mutilation of ideology, Persian ideology, Scythian, pre-Celtic, Norse, Finnish, etc., all of that being trash. Well, who even thinks of it, the North? That's a bunch. There's nothing. Arctic homeland, ring a bell? But we're dealing even with genocide. A group called the Little People, known throughout the whole of the world. A whole race that could have been the indigenous ones, the ones who you were just talking about nature, right? Right. The right brain maybe is partly sectioned off because it also contains the memory of blood and gore and mayhem like nobody could ever imagine. Of the genocide, the super genocide of an entire race of wise people that we laughingly call the Little People. But actually behind that is an incredible story. Right? Incredible story. More than any Irish nutter who believes in leprechauns could ever imagine. And these banshees and all the goblins and dwarves and gnomes. And I've done a thing on the Little People in the premium thing. That's just scraping the surface. The real story there, as Professor Tolkien understood when he was talking about his hobbits and the fucking threat of Mordor, is worldwide genocide. And many, many phases later on in history where there was purges of these people. And the idea to appropriate their knowledge, to rape their women, because you thought that by raping their women, you get good luck. If you had a child born of one of the Little People, the fairy people. You can't even imagine the burning of the forests of the world, which was their habitat. You can't even face it. And native people knew about this, but couldn't speak it. So where the oral tradition came from, because it was so horrific. Our world was already in ruins 30,000 years ago. Any holocausts of the modern period are like nothing, and they're already happening to mentally deranged and mutilated people, half zombies. So when you have Krishna telling Arjuna, don't worry about killing them, they're already dead, meaning they've already killed themselves. There's a lot of wisdom in that. They're the walking dead. That means us, because a great people, a kingly race, who really understood the herbs and really understood the movement of the stars and understood things of moving great stones, right? These little merry ones that, Christmas is coming up. We'll include them in this fiasco. Some Coca-Cola dreamt up nonsense sticking under the Christmas tree. Do you realize where that leads? And the knowledge that these people had of pharmacopoeia and whatever, we wiped them out. So we're already diseased, right? All consciousness is already in a state. We're like the zombies. It's like Omega Man, with Charlton Heston. Go watch that. We're the ones walking around covered in sores and thinking that we're kings of the world. The real kings of the world have long been gone. Professor Tolkien, Sir Roger Lancelot Green, C.S. Lewis, Owen Barfield, and others sat around their table drinking their beer, going, "I don't think we're going to be able to publish any of this in non-fiction, lads." They went, "Yep, you're right. What do we do?" Because they had access to it all these Anglo-Saxons. Tolkien is on record telling his son, telling the world that anything after Beowulf, right, anything after the Anglo-Saxon period is just like comic book shit. He wasn't even interested in it. Real English literature ended at the Anglo-Saxon period. Everything before was the true story of the world. And his Numenor was Atlantis. He told Christopher Tolkien, and it's actually verifiable even in writings that Christopher Tolkien found out later on, that his father actually believed that Numenor was Atlantis. He was basing it on that fact. Well, only an idiot would doubt it anyway. A man who invented 22 complete languages, including Elven tongue. That's right, folks, 22 independent, completely functioning languages. This is not an idiot. You don't get any higher in intellect. So I don't care what Richard Dawkins or some other clueless fucker who's into Darwinism tells you. But the only thing different is that group said, "I don't think we can communicate this in non-fiction because we're going to be pilloried." Right. But you have one other choice. Do it in fiction. And the rest is history. But in that story is the destruction of whole races. So it's just a long-winded way to say we are living on the bones and the sepulchres of a whole race whose wisdom is second to none, who were able to talk to the animals, who were able to talk to the trees. And that all these subsequent acts of desecration of the papal church, but even the Byzantine church, they're not off the hook. They're 10 times better than the fucking Roman church, but still when it comes to the pagan world, they're vile. Well, these two contingents destroyed and continue to destroy the habitats of these little people right up until modern times. And then they wanted to even hit the people who were even the kings and the shaman, who even preserved a little bit. Even those guys had to be crucified. And those guys had only a sort of a fleeting, right? But there's been waves and waves and waves. And what we're talking about here is nature. Now, do you really think that after all of that Holocaust, nature's going to continue to reveal its secrets to these plunderers? Especially without putting people through initiation? So the initiations began. Just as the Vedic turned to the pre-Vedic, all the native Indians created shaman folk who said no. Right? They wore the horns of the stag god, and they said no, punk. Now, in order to initiate you into the mysteries of nature, right, ass-kicking time, and that's what we know as the Underworld Cycle, which is revealed in the tarot, which is part of astrology and the 13th sign and all the rest of it. We come full circle to the original point about the zodiac being instrumental to the mysteries of Hercules' 12. But then there's the 13, and there's the Underworld Cycle. And how that mythos then entered into so many things. And totem animals become very, very important here. And again, as we said earlier, your own personal connectivity back to nature, despite the history. You can't go back in time. So what you can do, as I've said, for many, many years, is you can pull the trauma from the past to now. You can go out to nature reverently and sit with it and bring all of that trauma up from within yourself and face it now and cleanse it. But that act is not, it's not written in any A to Z. It could never be. And that's what the shaman understood, and they put their acolytes through that by throwing them into the darkness, have them wander about, get bitten by cobras and all the rest of it. It was all part of a whole initiation to say, are you worthy? And since man cannot tell one man is worthy or not, well, maybe the snake can tell if the kid's worthy or not, right? And all over the world, you have those rituals. You pass or you fail. And a lot of this involves some, quite bizarre rites from very, very ancient times. Probably circumcision on a good day is based in this, but, everything gets tweaked out of shape. And this priestarchy, this Christianity, this Roman version, and the Byzantine version, which is no more, all of it, Judaism, the lot. I'm a pagan, so you can throw it all out. The world could be free of that stuff, might be a big help. But you won't get free of it, unless you understand every detail of it, where it came from. So hence my website and books on astrotheology and trees of life, because I'm trying to dissect every single part of it. Why was Osiris enclosed in the tree, the sacred tree? And all the rest of it. Why was Jesus and Bacchus, hanged on the tree? Who's Isus, the tree god of the pre-Celts, and all the rest of it, right? So there's a tremendous study there, and it involves nature, the core of nature. But the initiation is, nature's not yielding up its fruits anymore because we've so desecrated her. And so part of any learning is deconstructive. It's not acquisitive, as all the schools have taught us and all the collegiates teach us. It's a very apophatic thing, actually.
Michael, you brought up a lot of the myriad cultural legends, which is something that interests me greatly. And when we read myths about, for instance, like the snake-haired Medusa or Kitsune from Japan or Lamia, or the Nordic myth of Skazgra, or creatures like banshees, mermaids, vampires, witches, and other corrupting female forces, they are often portrayed as being very seductive and lustful to men. We also have the archetype of the succubus and the siren. Can you speak to the specific attributes of these various creatures and these various legends that have had their influence on men, that have had men living, for instance, in fear or in subjugation to women?
One aspect connects to what I said about the desecration that nature has suffered under our hands. And so the Lamia, the Lorelei, the siren, the witch, all of that comes about as her gruesome face in response to our desecration. So in one level, there's a positive aspect to it, in which we're bound now to see a different guise, right, of the divine feminine. Of course, we know that nature erupts in earthquakes and firestorms and cometary action. And so it's ingrained in our, before the rational comes to explain it away, back in our unconscious is this idea of the daemonic or the demonic. So where a lot of the Kali stuff comes from. There's a ferocious aspect of nature. Then there's this shamanic period where one put the acolyte through, trials. And in that also aspect, there's a frightening aspect of nature because, she might devour you, might kill you, maybe not worthy, right? Then, and I'm doing this in the horror film thing we're doing, or I'm doing soon, a podcast coming up in a couple of weeks. There's another slant, which is that the demonic feminine, it's hard to unpack the whole thing now, but I'll just say that the beautiful guise of it, it's based in the beauty of nature, of course, but there's another slant to it as well, and that is that the beauty is to allure and seduce and attract. Quite rightly, as you say, that these figures of mythology, one of their emanations is a beauteous countenance. That is to attract the acolyte, right? The male, because the chivalric men, like Sir Mordred, right? So the feminine adopts two guises. One guise is to seduce an acolyte, like Odysseus or whoever it might be, right, to her service. And that then is the figure that he is shown. Right? He falls for this beauteous guise, and he transgresses the taboo, like Sir Lancelot transgressed the taboo of taking his king's wife, Guinevere, right? That kind of thing. Morgane Le Fay tries it on as well with Merlin. So she shows this positive face, but what the mythos, where the mythos ends, right, traditionally, is that, okay, she seduces a knight to her cause, who then, in the case of, say, a Mordred, or another knightly figure who's deluded by her erotic charms, what does he do? The first thing he does is go and seduce a female to his side. So female, male, female, right? And so on. So the mythos just ends with her seducing the masculine. But the vampire, Count Dracula, or whoever, right, goes, the first thing he's doing is biting the neck of some female. So he has been recruited by the Dark Mother, or the Terrible Mother, and then he recruits another woman to her cause. Now that one is kind of left out a lot, who then goes on to seduce another man, and so on and so on and so on. So it starts with the female, and the female is instrumental down the line. You can see this in films like Twins of Evil and things like that, the Hammer film. So, so there's an initiation, of which the female plays a very big role. And it's almost like the male, for all his, bluster and knightly prowess, is really a kind of a minor figure. He's just to bring the women together. It's a female cult. But he's instrumental for what he is. And sometimes in the great movies of Dracula, where he is really dashing and he is really handsome, but at the same time, if you're looking at the film very closely, you'll see that he's really a representative of the night. He's a representative of the ocean. He appears in in Bram Stoker's original story. Doesn't he crash on the rocks of Whitby off the eastern coast of England? And all the shipmates are killed, or some hideous, death has happened, and the only one lying on the beach alive is Count Dracula, right? So again, coming out of the ocean, it's kind of obvious. Or coming from an old land, Transylvania, beyond the forest. Well, the forest is a classic symbol of the female, right? The Earth Mother. There's a whole thing, to be unpacked there. So I concluded then that a lot of what we're surrounded by, including these myths of Dracula and werewolves, and the werewolf responds to what? The moon, right? Oh my God, how obvious it are really stories of female cults. Right? Way back when, these came out of female cults. And then when you get into that and slam the door behind you and go, right, we're going to go through this now. Oh my God, what a tale unfolds. And I've done it in auto rank, but we'll do it again in a more of a brief thing in the thing on movies, because it's just a different context, but a very good one because people are more familiar with that. Nobody's even heard of auto rank, right? But they've heard of Dracula or whatever. So I'll be bringing to bear some of the things we're talking about there in just a couple of weeks on a podcast there, and getting into that, and then having commentary on that later on. But there is something then about the terrible mother who breeds the male child, right? And one of her aspects is terrible because when you were in the womb, you were entirely peaceful in one level and comforted and nurtured, but there was also no will. So the child realizes that the awesome power of the mother absolutely excised his will. So then there's the drive, the masculine drive, to separate from the mother to be an independent being. But you've got to plow through all that Euroboric comfort that she provided, where it's all on tap. So blood becomes very important. Semen becomes very important. Life force becomes very important. Right? Little tiny claustrophobic spaces, narrow, right? Like in the movie Alien, right? These all become very important motifs because it's the uterine symbolism, the cauldron, the Holy Grail, the body of the mother, the sex act, right? All of these things start to have ambiguous, bivalent, consequences on consciousness. There's this natural striving to get away from all of that because otherwise I can't have a will of my own and I can't be independent. But there's this drag factor of the abyss. So immediately the mother, that is a very, very ambiguous, bivalent character, becomes both the ground from which you rose to move on, but also the black hole of the abyss that pulls you back into nothingness. So this is the fate of consciousness, an incredible duad. And the mother, the Gorgon, then you have the three graces and the three muses, right? Perseus, who goes to cut the head of the Gorgon, isn't he armed by three women? What's this? Well, what this is a female story. It couldn't be any other way. Women wrote the story. Because even though the woman is the enchantress and seductress and destroyer, yeah, but the hero is armed by three other women. who give him his shield, give him the wings on his feet, give him the white horse always being a symbol of the sun, the conquer evil, and the black horse being the servant of evil, and things like that. The amazing thing that leads you to believe, I don't think any man wrote any of this. So the feminists have it all arse about face. They have no clue how the structure that they claim to hate. And in one set of, the Dragon Mother and adultism, I deal with one critique of the feminist, but that is not exhausted. There's still another way they go wrong, which again, I refer people to the auto rank presentation, which, towards the end of that presentation, it's many hours long, goes into this extraordinary act of deception that women perpetrated for millennia on men, and then suffered the consequences, an enormous fall from grace when the deception was revealed, so to speak. And so that creates a dynamic that, as we move up into modern times, is the reason for the rise of Judaism, extremely anti-feminine paradigms and dogmas like Judeo-Christian. Why did they arise? Can we phenomenologically ask a question? Of the millions of things that could have arisen in the post-Vedic world, why do we have these feminine negating, earth negating, body negating, Gnostic-ass religions plaguing mankind? They came from somewhere. There's a root to them. There's a reason. And that ends up, if you study the chain of what we've been talking about, the chain of symbolism, of etymology, and secret society symbolism, this is where it eventually leads. Right? So it's not made up or concocted. This is where the roads lead. And you find that even the original devil and all of this, had a feminine image, a feminine imagery, and there's some sort of cognitive dissonance. And that cognitive dissonance might easily explain even the neurological divided brain. It's all under question. It's all up for grabs.
When I conceptualize masculinity and femininity, I tend to think that the masculine is, if it's imbalanced, let's say, it can be a progressive form of derangement, meaning that we're striving so hard to progress away from nature that we get into transhumanism and we start creating AI and we chase the singularity and everything becomes about this atomism and mathematics and the kind of linear side of the brain. But when I think about femininity, again, if it's imbalanced, if it's chased to its logical conclusion, I tend to think of it more as like a regressive derangement, where it's this return to antiquity, this return almost like like Ludditism or something to that effect. I'm in the health field, and so when I talk to people about health, there's the Western science proponents, and that's all that they see, and that's all that they respect, and that's all that they listen to. And then there's the traditionalists, and they only listen to traditional Chinese medicine or the Vedic tradition, and they don't have any room in their thinking for the substantiation or the corroboration that Western science or Western medicine can bring about. In my life, I try to generally align with an Aristotelian mean, somewhere in the middle. I try to be balanced in that way. And so, you mentioned earlier things like returning to nature or meditating or playing an instrument to engage that right brain. So what are some other ways that humanity at large can find an egalitarian balance between the masculine and feminine dynamics that I'm speaking about, so that we can strive to avoid basically another patriarchal tyranny or another matriarchal tyranny?
That's actually one of the greatest questions anybody could ask, because the answer is it really can't be made simplified. One of the things that our modern urbanite world, the society we've been critiquing, does for us is to simplify things that are actually very, very complex. And of course, that is a very great virtue. But when it comes to this return to nature, as we've been saying, you're going to the roots of roots. And so it's not easy. And playing an instrument, I would even recommend, the study of words in a holistic way, right? Martin Heidegger jumps to mind here, Owen Barfield. The very language that we speak in order to win others to us. Or it's like the Hegelian thing I've talked about before. Language is instrumental to the mystery of self-consciousness. But the mystery of self-consciousness isn't a mystery without the other. So already we got not only a bizarrity, but a duad. and a collapse of the duad, because obviously by knowing the other, I'm really centroverting. I'm learning about myself. So all consciousness doesn't even become self-consciousness unless there's the centroversion. You reach out to the world, and in the world you find not only objects but entities. You interact originally with the other person as hostile. That's Hegel's master-slave. You end up realizing that doesn't really work. And at some higher level of sophistication, you suddenly realize, yeah, it doesn't work, because actually the other is the mirror of myself. So yes, it's sort of narcissistic. You can put these words to it, but it's perfectly natural. You wouldn't have self-consciousness without the other. And the other is looking to you for pretty much the same thing. There's a reaching out to one to the other. And then in this engagement, you move from the ruder stages up to a more sophisticated level. And all the time in that is the self is being further and further delved into and understood and rarefied and made more transparent. It all comes under, a term I use called centroversion. And as we're moving forward now, and as I said, nature plays a huge role in this, because it's the backdrop upon which the human drama takes place. But as nature is more and more left out in our urban concrete and steel, the background is falling away. And therefore, it's doubtful whether there's going to be any depth or purity to this encounter. But if the encounter breaks down, as it is now, your single mothers and your single parent homes and all, well, this is the whole Hegelian self-consciousness thing completely collapsing, right? But what collapses more? Centroversion, self-awareness. So do you see how it comes? It's a long way around, but we get to autism. So where it was when boy meets girl, you have this reaching out to each other. But with the pollution of all of that now, the pollution and the poisoning of the midworld, the very act of self-knowledge, the very process is breaking down. And this then will be, you'll see this in people's relationship to their garden, to their community, to nature at large. Right? Because if centroversion breaks down and self-reference breaks down, and the whole process that creates a culture breaks down, Umwelt is obviously going to suffer. So, as I said, now it becomes a very complex thing by which you might have to go to Umwelt to get back to Mitwelt, right? So this is an enormous journey, and nobody can understate it. Although many things are made into self-help books and spinner rack, levels, yeah, to get to be, a very high-grade martial artist, where in Qigong or Tai Chi, to have mastered it, that's kind of hard. I mean, I'm not even there, right? There's no way that, I can do it. I haven't had the time to put it into that. So, yeah, these are uphill things. And so there are, in one way, no easy things. So what I've always advised my audience is take the time, make the time. There are no shortcuts, to the real thing. There's some shortcuts along the way. But one of them, again, is studying the mystery of the English language, which connects to Old High German and which has its own interesting roots. That's another thing that I've done in my private life, but haven't been able to really, bring to bear. I guess my etymology page on Irish Origins of Civilization website is probably the most public thing, but I haven't been able to really do it justice. It just doesn't fit in and of a day. But I would recommend that, because the study of words takes you from this reductive aspect into the magical, into the montic, and into the symbolic. Study of mathematics. Somebody who's really scientific, yeah, but why aren't you studying the phi ratio then? Why aren't you studying sacred geometry? Buckminster Fuller. Do you know what wonders are out there? So I try to have a whole smorgasbord of references, for people who have a genuine interest. But in my work, they might find something that, would have taken them many millennia, to come across some of these little hidden teachers, people like Otto Rank, and so many others I could mention, like Immanuel Velikovsky, Julian Jaynes, right? So this is where, I get feedback from people going, my God, I'm 50, Michael, I've studied math all my life and everything, but I never even heard of Gematria, or language all my life and found a Gematria. Or I've studied mathematics all my life, never even heard of sacred geometry. Now, well, Leonardo was into it. Better get started, right? And in the sacred geometry is the voice of nature, because the proportions in your own being are also those that are encoded into nature. So I mean? So part of my public job is to be a sort of a director, to people, to direct them to, hey, what's your interest? Oh, numerology? Hey, Kabbalah, you're interested in all that? Brilliant. Hey, did you know that's connected to the Persians and the Tree of Life and the Pre-Arya? the Arya, the pre-Vedics, or you're into whatever discipline you're into. If you're into pattern recognition, hey, let's go to symbolism and astrology and all of that. Not because I'm into each of those things as some, that's it. Right? I'm about the most eclectic, thinker and teacher that you'll ever find. And I've been like that since my teens. Somebody come to me and I'd say, remember going to people's houses, seeing these beautiful artwork in the world? And I said, who did that? I go, oh, I did. Oh my God, have you ever heard of sacred geometry? I love this design. No, I never heard of it. And before you know, their lives are transformed, right? Because, that's it. That's the day that came. Hey, go and get a book on Pacioli. Go and get a book on Vitruvius. And the next thing you know, something's really blossomed. Right? That's like a sort of mercurial character who has the ability to see where a person's genius is. Well, that's the Egyptian Ka. That's the double. That's the double self, the twin self, coming in as a guide. Is often called the daemon. Well, certain people can represent the daemon, sort of like an external guide. And I see myself very much as that. And I know I have been, absolutely. There can be no question about it, for so many people who are just caught up in domestic minutiae, caught up in the lifestyle, but despite their orientation towards the world and its lunacy, there's an inner voice that says, I'm strangled in here. I have no clue what, I know the gateway questions, but I've never thought about them. So there's something autonomous, probably a little voice from within, right? The still small voice demands that you wake up in a sweat one day and go, I don't know anything. But as Socrates said, the thing about me, the greatest philosopher, is he knows he doesn't know anything. That's the great starting point. So the journey begins, right? And so the next step, the next step, the next step. But I always make sure to never institutionalize anything. I've got no school, I've avoided all of that. Don't want to go on Joe Rogan. Everybody invites me, I just tell them to fuck off, right? I don't want any institutionalized. I want people to come to me when they're ready. I've been contacted by Russell Brand, and, you wouldn't believe the whole palaver of it, right? I prefer people like yourself, who respectfully come and we just chat about the thing, right? Because I just don't like all that mainstream crap. History channels, you wouldn't believe how many times I'm contacted by this and that body. Just recently was contacted by a group I'd rather not mention, very prominent. And, told them to go fuck themselves, right? So, no, my work I've really understood now isn't for everybody. What am I talking about? I understood that from the start, but as every year's gone by, I've become more and more honed in on that fact. Yeah, and it's okay. It's absolutely okay. I actually prefer it.
Okay, closing out our discussion today, Michael, I want to ask you your thoughts on developing symbol literacy. As you've outlined, there's so much to gain from developing symbol literacy. It's not just an eccentric hobby or pastime. It really helps you to understand the universe. It helps you to understand yourself, the inner and the outer. It really is almost like understanding the source code of the matrix, if you will. And for someone who's, let's say, starting out on this journey, what's some advice you would give to them for developing symbol literacy? How can they begin to open their eyes to this otherwise elusive world?
Well, there's many ways, right? I started myself by corporate logos, strangely. Might not appeal to people, right? But looking at the symbolism in the modern media, billboards, magazines, art, copy. This is how I discovered, the esoteric roots of it. This is back it began in 1982, after I'd read a magazine that talked about subliminal art, that there's subliminal images in it, right? And I must have been only 14 or 15 at the time, so that kicked me off and then never stopped. And then it moved into movies and all of that, right? And it never stopped. I do it still. In fact, we'll be doing something on, the Hidden Persuaders again. I've done programs on that, and we'll be reprising that as well in the podcasts. That's one way. Sacred geometry is another way. But see, again, factoring in the body, strange as it might sound to people, but getting into Tai Chi and Qi Gong is also awakening symbolic literacy. because it's awakening the bio, the biopsyche, bioenergetic knowledge, which is actually one of the things that our society is very, very impoverished with. Even though there seems to be the superficial, health culture, pump it till it hurts nonsense. It's so off the charts, it's rubbish. There's no use to it at all. Right? So, because it's not about contacting the body, it's about preserving a master-slave relationship with the body. The very antithesis of what is needed. You want to work with the powers of the body. And one of those things is the movement essentiality, like you see in Bharatanatyam dancing, and there's a whole school there, right? It's actually featured in the tarot. Many people have even thought that some of the images in the tarot look like they're dancing. Some actually are, right? And others are very much based in that. So there's many aspects to it, actually, right? And then one is just getting out the paints and, getting into it as an artist, or a calligraphy pen, or awakening, taking an art class even, you know what I mean? So that your eye comes into play. We're not even using our senses anymore. So color, smell of color, finding a medium and doing it without any, making collages or whatever, and doing it without any kind of materialistic orientation. It's really something you do with a door closed, like making jewelry or whatever. You don't think in terms of, making money at it or anything like that. If that's going to develop that way, let it. That's fine. But you do it, you kick off by doing it, as one of these explorations is very important. And then there's just the formal study. People can come to my work, start with trees of life, dip into the astrotheology stuff. I've got a lot of stuff on symbolism. I've got, in the Origins and Oracle series, which is on Enslaved, there's things there that dip into the esoteric aspect. It's also very important to develop symbol literacy because it's the one way we can immunize ourselves against the torrent of subliminals, that are coming into our psyche or into the psyche of our children. Now they're on these iPads and all. It's just pouring forth. So unless you've got ad blocker on there or something else, but even just in the billboards and the magazines, there's some very toxic pornographic stuff pouring into the minds of children. And it's actually assisting them to become very autistic and regressed. You talk about the ultra-feminization that we're seeing. This is all part of it. It's a breakdown of the rational. And it's very, very deadly. So, yeah, there's the formal study of symbolism. You can even get into dream symbolism, like in Carl Jung. But I try to add elements of that into a great deal of the presentations that I do. Some have been strictly on symbols, and then others, it'll be thrown in there anecdotally. The female Illuminati, again, would be a really good place to start, but there are many other presentations. But again, it's almost like a kind of an awakening of the right brain, and the realization that everything is symbolic, right? Everything, and that really at the end of that road, like I'll be arguing in this book that's coming out on existentialism, is at the end of the road, art, music, poetry, you'll find out is really the highest philosophy. I always put aesthetics above metaphysics, totally inverting the traditional schools, right? An article on the Michael Tsarion website called Mysticism, Truth or Falsity. And you'll see it abbreviated there. It's a short article that can be read, and it stresses this point, that what would happen if we put aesthetics, which is normally the lowest, philosophical branch or school, just invert it and put it above metaphysics, epistemology, moral philosophy. Yeah, I think it transforms the entire world. And I hold by that. Because after all, at the bottom of all cognition is perception. Right? You perceive the world and the data and the stimuli of the world just sort of relatively passively, and then later on, there's mental architectonics involved, right? But relatively passive, it's not really passive, but relatively speaking, just passive observation is the first connectivity that we have with the world. So there's your, reason to look at the colors and to look at the shapes and the shades and the hues. You see, there's a great statement now, and of course Ayn Rand backed this up. Her Romantic Manifesto is a book that everybody should read. because she goes into this and then talks about how perceptions become conceptions, and there's already what's happening there. How does that happen? Does the world teach us that? We agree that the world as a thing, as an entity, is there, but and it's showing us a lot of things and teaching us. Does it teach us how to go to take the objects and entities we see and perceive up to the next level of conception? Where's the manual? And then from conception, say higher up, materialist, why haven't you addressed this? Or if you have addressed it, you've explained it away. There's something happening in consciousness that's actually marvelous. Perception becomes conception. Yeah, let's start there, kids. And maybe it is the world that's teaching us that on some more, primordial level. That's what nature is. Nature could be calling us to say, look at me, look at me, look at me. There's a road to go on. And so naturally, in this unfolding, if nature is this, teacher, the supreme teacher, hey, maybe there is, through the imagination and the intuition, this is how conception comes about. And something, Ayn Rand is quite open to that. Because her philosophy was called objectivism, which focuses entirely on how the reason of man is informed by the natural world. You see, and it's quite legitimate then to think that sets up a give and a take. And that's what we should be studying. That's one of the hearts of philosophy. She's a philosopher that's not even mentioned in most dictionaries of American philosophers. Wonder why. But some other critical Marxist, purveying some sort of anal sadism and regression and postmodernism is, like you say, they're all over the place. What a great philosopher who's telling you about the actual construction of consciousness. And very key to that is that in this process, like I said, there would be higher processes of it. Above conception becomes this psychoepistemology that you just don't think only, and you don't perceive, and you don't conceive, and you don't have knowledge only. You have a supervailing reappraisal of what it is that's in your head. Oh, ethics? That's right. Because now, part of that surveilling epistemology is the ethical foundation to your being that can value and disvalue things that you're coming in from the world. Otherwise, you just got a bunch of dumpster stuff in your head. Brilliant. Well, I look around. See those glazed expressions? You wouldn't want to know what's underneath it, the horror. She's saying there's a surveilling principle of the reason that is also learned to value. And this is where the education starts. Now it's on John Dewey and all this other shit that they're teaching in the schools. It's this valuation, right? The ability to value a person, an experience, a thing in your head. So, then we go into that. And that's ethics. But the whole of it working together is centroverting, because it's important to think in those terms, because all of it, although it is orientated towards the world, you are instantiated in it all. So there's self-knowledge. There's always self-knowledge involved in every encounter with an object. And all I'm saying is that aesthetics tends to be a more intimate connectivity through perception. When you actually have to draw that cup, right, or draw that landscape, you're absolutely getting up closer to it. And just like Ayn Rand in her Romantic Manifesto talks about how then you bring the world into your head. How the hell did it get there? It gets there through conception. But then, the conception is omnidirectional and plastic. So it builds and builds and builds and builds. We accept that neurons do this physically, yeah, but conceptions do it psychically, psychologically. And it gets so vast, the picture that we have in our head, that art, as she beautifully tells us, is the disgorging periodically of the conceptual back to the perceptual in this extraordinary cycle of necessity. And this extraordinary lemniscate, this extraordinary process of, of self and other, and of call and response. So the perceptual becomes the conceptual, but the conceptual isn't just to sit in your head. It's to create great art. Seen any lately? Damien Hirst? No, we haven't seen any lately. We've seen a lot of desecration of the great art. Well, right, what is that? So Ayn Rand is wrong? Some eviscerated corpse sitting on in the middle of the park? Something like a fall from the sky? some hideous, modern art. This is valuation. Oh, no, 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 no. It's the blue canvas for 30 million bucks. What am I thinking? For goodness sake, I must have it. I must have it. Yeah. I think what we're talking about is real important. And I think symbol literacy is real important because it's going to immunize you and bring you back to reason. No, I don't think I want that in my head. I don't think I want that in my house or my community. Get it? You go into hotels and you see things that look, like, did somebody vomit that out? I mean, why is it on my hotel room here? I mean, who chose this? This is what you could choose? I mean, and you have to state it. You've got to be brave and confrontational with these twats who do this and are filling, because if you don't, then they're just going to run amok and fill our world with this irrational, pornographic nonsense. There was an incident, I think it was in Newport Beach, where a guy, it's in Brian Wilson Keyes or one of his books, Age of Manipulation or whatever it is. And he said that this kid had a drowning accident, washed up on the beach, and when he was pulled to safety, because he was near half dead, the witnesses say that he was just reciting nonstop all these different commercials from about 20 years ago. All these commercials they recognize for, Wheaties and toothpaste and soap and alcohol or whatever, was just being recited word for word. Yeah. And they were like blown away. Well, yeah, because those subliminals work. They don't spend millions upon millions in Madison Avenue and other more secret agencies doing it because it doesn't work. They do it because it does work. And just behind the alignment of the conscious control and the pre-conscious, because that stuff is, well, the technique, we don't have time to go into it now, but the technique, the phenomena exists, believe me, it exists, and it's extremely insidious. And the only one way to defend yourself against that and your children is symbolic literacy. So it has a mundane aspect, but it has a very, very high aesthetic experience as well, and it puts you back to what consciousness and thinking is really all about. So I highly recommend her book, The Romantic Manifesto, and everything else she wrote too, by the way. But again, man, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you and share. Like I said, I turned them all down. This is, but it's always a joy to come on your show and talk with you. So thanks again.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, likewise, I really appreciate you coming on the show. Just some finishing thoughts of mine, it's so evident. I mean, we don't even want to think for ourselves. And so when we're being shown a movie, for instance, we don't like open-ended, endings. We want to be told explicitly what to think and how to feel about the character's journey and the sequence of events. We don't want anything left to the imagination. And so, to your point about perception becomes conception, another way to think about it is they say, seeing is believing, but actually believing is seeing. And so, as you start to change your mind about certain things, as you start to expand your worldview, as you start to develop symbol literacy, those things will begin to play out in your life. So you'll choose your environment, and then your environment chooses you, if you can think about it like that. It's a feedback loop. And so the mind expresses itself on the environment, and the environment expresses itself on the mind. I generally think that there are two essence level factors that drive the evolution of consciousness. And you can think about this in terms of the masculine-feminine dynamic. One is a receptive force, one is a dynamic force. And so you have exploration, which you mentioned, and then expression, which you mentioned. So exploration and expression, one is coming into contact with what is novel in your environment. Again, that's when we're speaking about the bifurcation of the brain. You have the creative right brain, the receptive right brain, which is there to make contact with something new and novel. And then you have the left brain, which is there to kind of understand it and express itself. And so, again, when we're trying to articulate the problems that are manifest in society on a macroscopic level, when we're looking at the aberrant expressions of the masculine and feminine psyche on the geopolitical level, for instance, it's so important to understand where these things come from and to understand the underlying imbalance that is, pretty obvious in each and every one of us. And so, to my audience, as Michael is talking about developing symbol literacy, and as he's kind of, explaining the importance of why you should do that and why you should incorporate these things in your life, I want to stress the fact that this is there to improve you, that these are tool sets that are otherwise unused at your fingertips. These are things that can't be taken away from you. You can be locked up in some high tower, in some dungeon, and you still have the apparatus of the mind. You still have the apparatus of the intuition. And so these are inalienable kind of, essence level attributes that we're all born with, which I would encourage our listeners to take every advantage of, because the social engineers and the architects of control are doing their very best to hoodwink you and to make you distracted and to pull your attention away from, the hand that's pickpocketing you. They want to divert your attention. They want to have us all pitted against each other, but more importantly, they want to have us inwardly divided. And so the work of Michael Tsarion and other great, researchers and investigators, get your hands on that information. It's out there. These are people who are trying to guide you to your own salvation, and you have the keys to your own salvation. No one else does. So I'm so thankful you came on the show today, Michael. I really appreciate it. Please give our listeners, where they can find all of your work and all of your socials.
Well, I got about 14 sites. You get them access to them all from michaeltsarion.com or msar.com for short. One of them is Unslaved, where we do our own podcast. It's about 3 years now. From this month onwards, it's about 3 years we've been doing it, and it's just top drawer material. I know you've been our guest before, and we'll have to have you on again soon, so people can go there and sign up. And they also get, from Unslaved, it's also a portal by which they get to all of the previous stuff, which we have been scraping it off of YouTube, and public sources for obvious reasons. We're no longer going to, lower it down to a mediocre level. The knowledge is second to none, and so we want to present it in a different kind of format as well. So with my colleague David Whitehead, that's what we're doing. And it really is top drawer stuff, made very palatable for this journey, right? It's really a journey of immunity. We are disciples, not only disciples of the truth, but we need to be able to preserve the truth, because more and more psychopathic people are surrounding us, more disorientated people without a compass, morally or any other. There's more parental nonsense where there's no ethical interest. The parent doesn't even know that those things are important. They think just the biological sprouting out of children is, the supreme task, and then hand it over to the state. This is increasing every day. But at the same time, while you have a social duty, which can be quite exhausting and daunting, you also have the duty to your own being. Don't forget, right? To be a servant of truth means to never forget the Eigenwelt, which is the self. And you need to fortify. Because if you're out there, getting toxic from all the muck, how will that work? So the real mystical journey, you see, and there is one, is that of self-fortification and self-protection. And that comes through knowledge and through reason. So, yeah, studying the masters, the ones who are already pure before us, the giants, we stand on their shoulders. You'll find a myriad of them mentioned throughout my work. That doesn't mean I don't have any ideas of my own, as some of my critics think. Well, he just reads a lot, just reiterates what they say. Wrong. But, even if that's what you want to think, go ahead. Just use the sources that I provide and don't think of me at all. I'm quite happy for people to just, learn from these great men that we've spoken of in this program and many others that I mentioned. And if you just want to do that in a more of a raw, impolite way, hey, be my guest. I'm not caring one bit about that. And then, others who have more respect and understanding of the Herculean journey that I've done to synthesize a lot of dissimilar thought, they can go and enjoy the other work as well. It's really up to the individual. Freedom being the base of it all. But again, we'll be happy to continue this conversation down the line. It's so important to have it, especially in our times right now. We're in a period of tremendous change, but I always see it as being changed for the good. You know, if we didn't have adversaries, we couldn't strengthen our immune system. So you've got to think of it entirely in positive ways, really.
I highly encourage my audience to go check out all of Michael's work at his various websites, to go over to Unslaved Podcast, check out his and David's work. I've said this before on the program, but really the inspiration behind me starting Dauntless Dialogue was Unslaved Podcast. So it's really a library, a wealth of information. It's more important than a college curriculum, a college degree, if you ask me, which is really worth rubbish these days. But I highly encourage my audience to go check out their work. And Michael, thank you so much again for coming on the show today. And I guess we'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you so much to my audience for supporting everything I do. Michael, look like you had another word you wanted to say?
No, that's it.
Cheers. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.